Sorry.
Welcome to Octavia Tried to Tell Us. We are live. I am Monica A. Coleman.
And I'm Tananarive Due. Much happier now that my fan is on.
I know, the little heat wave coming across the country, for fall at least.
California.
Yeah. So we're glad to have you here. Drop in the chat and let us know where you're coming from, because Tananarive loves herself a chat.
I do love the chat. And I can't believe it, Monica. 20th
Number
episode.
20. Can you believe we've been doing this 20 times?
months and still in the pandemic.
We did not think that part. We really didn't think it would be this long. I don't think anyone did from the beginning.
No, I don't know why we didn't. I guess because we've never experienced anything like this before. But yeah, and it's especially strange that there are two different worlds right now. People who are carrying along life as if there is no pandemic, and then people who are very much impacted by the effects of the lingering pandemic. So those elements of denial that Octavia wrote about so well have definitely slipped into our culture.
Right. And we have to remember it's a global pandemic. And so, access to vaccines and treatments are just not the same everywhere in the world.
Or in the country.
Right. The virus's strands aren't the same everywhere in the world. And so, I guess that's what makes it take so long. It's a global pandemic.
Yes. Well, welcome to Octavia Tried to Tell Us. Very excited to introduce our guest today.
We are. Let's see if I got my slides going. Check us out.
Of course you do.
It's kind of like riding a bike. I'm always happy I just stay on, I'm always happy when things work out. So this is number 20, a parable for today's pandemic. To tell you a little bit about our time together, we will start off with introductions. We'll have our conversation. We'll have Q&A. We got some great questions ahead of time, and you can always drop some in the chat as well. And
don't forget to tag us on social media. She paused for me because I'm the one who's obsessed with Twitter. Don't forget to tag us on social media, all the socials, as they say, Twitter, Instagram, even Facebook.
Where Tananarive barely goes these days.
If you practice Facebook, but Twitter is where I live. Always glad to see your tweets about what we're talking about and inviting other people to the conversation.
We have great parallel conversations on Twitter. And I now get to introduce my friend, Tananarive Due. She is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years. Tananarive has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. And her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. I'm also going to put a plug in for her book, The Between, which is being reissued again in the scary month of October. So check it out.
After years.
After many years. See, look how fame just circles around and around and around. She's married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays. They live with their son, Jason, and 2 cats.
My friend and dynamic co-host is Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman. Monica is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She is also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and an initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. The author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017. And Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion, mental health, sexual and domestic violence, and navigating change. She lives in a lively intergenerational household where she's an avid vegan cook and cyclist. So that is Monica.
And I am delighted to introduce our guest, my friend and colleague, Roger Snead. He is professor and chair of the religion department at Furman University, where he has taught since 2007. He teaches African American religious history and thought, Christian ethics, sexuality, and Christian theologies, introduction to religion, and a host of other courses that address religion, culture, and society. He's a member of the American Academy of Religion, where he has served as co-chair of the Gay Men in Religion Program Unit, a member of the Status of LGBTIQ persons in the Profession Committee, and is currently a member of the Program Committee. Dr. Snead's first book, Representations of Homosexuality, Black Liberation Theology and Cultural Criticism, was a critique of the representations and erasures of homosexuality within Black liberation and womanist theologies, as well as in some forms of Black cultural criticism. His new book, The Dreamer and the Dream, Afrofuturism and Black Religious Thought, was published by the Ohio State University Press as part of the New Sun's Race, Gender, and Sexuality in the Speculative series. We're glad to welcome Dr. Roger Snead.
Hi, thank you. Hi, it's great to be here.
Welcome.
And thank you. Yes. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, welcome to Octavia Try to Tell Us.
Thank you.
Great to have you here today. So the question we always ask, I'll let you ask Tananarive because you lead off with it.
Oh, sure. There's so many things that we can discuss with you, but let's go back to that intersection of your work and perhaps just what started as appreciation for the work of Octavia Butler. How did Octavia's work first come into your life?
Okay. It started in graduate school. When I was getting ready to write my dissertation, my doctoral father, Victor Anderson, who Monica knows well, asked me what I wanted to write my dissertation on. And at that point, I had kind of blazed into graduate school. I was going to write the Black Gay Liberation Theology. I was going to save all of us. But by the time coursework had ended and I was done with qualifying exams, I was kind of sick and tired of doing it. I wanted to write about science fiction. And Victor said, "You won't get a job with that." And he said, "Go back to your statement of purpose, go back to that and think about, how you're going to write about that in a different way." And as I started writing the dissertation, I'm a stubborn person. So I said I was going to have science fiction in this book somehow, or in this dissertation somehow. And I had heard of Samuel Delany. Kind of just in this kind of like, oh, there's a Black science fiction writer. And then I don't know if people were Googling at that point, but I think people were using Yahoo at that point. So I think I Googled Black science fiction writers, and Octavia Butler came up. And our library had Fledgling. So my first encounter with Octavia Butler wasn't through the Parable books, it was through Fledgling.
Wow, that's different.
Yeah.
Way to go out on a limb there.
How did you process what you were reading?
Well, so after I did the dissertation, because I have a chapter where I was like writing about Black gay men's writing, and so I'm writing about Samuel Delany in that chapter. I think after that, I was writing or had written an essay that I think appeared in Ain't I a Woman, in Monica's Ain't I a Womanist, where I was looking at Michelle Ndegeocello and Octavia Butler. So I was doing a comparative analysis of, if I'm remembering what I wrote, so I was looking at Fledgling, and I was really fascinated by this woman I'd never heard of. And I kind of was mad at myself for never having heard of Octavia Butler. So after I finished that piece, I then got the Parable books and read them and reread them and haven't stopped rereading them. So that was my first entrance into her work. So in conjunction with this book, I was kind of digging around on the internet and whatnot and saw that the Huntington Library has her papers. So at that time, I had an endowed chair. It's a traveling endowed chair, so it's not like somebody was like, "Oh no, you're horrible, take it away," but it transferred to somebody else after its time ran out. So I said, okay, I have fall break. I'm going to go out to the Huntington and sit with these papers. Um, and that has been, um, I've been out there, I've been out to the Huntington, I think about 4 times now, and was going to go again in 20. And I was there the week that the pandemic really, I guess, took off here in the States. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to risk it. I'm just going to come back. Um, but I've wanted to go back because I kind of have another project that's kind of sitting around up here about specifically Octavia Butler, uh, and Afrofuturism and Black religion.
Mm.
But I would say that more so than reading her books, sitting in the archives and holding the papers that she like holding like sheets of paper in which she would write, um, was just almost a religious experience or a spiritual experience for me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a person who I feel like I vibe with her. I feel like I understand her description of herself as a hermit, as a person who kind of just prefers her own company. Um, so I would say that's kind of that in a nutshell.
I was going to ask you about your experience with the papers because, most people who fall in love with Octavia's work obviously do not go to see the papers. It's not that easy sometimes to get
Yeah,
in. So first of all,
yeah.
congratulations. You've been able to go so many times. But I was going to ask if it was that there was a specific project you were working on or more just being in her presence. And it sounds like it's a combination of those things, that you really actually sort of feel her presence in that space.
Yeah, I was working on the book. I was working on The Dreamer in the Dream. And so I was like, well, if I've got this opportunity, and this chair and allows me to, go out there, and sit with these papers, because I might find thing that I would not have encountered in their books. I wanted to see what she said about herself. What's her writing process? And wow, when you sit, and actually I want to come back to how I was able to even get in. It's like the Huntington allows you to go into the archives if you're, a scholar. I think even if you're a grad student, but there's a few more steps if you're a grad student. But yeah, but as a professor, they're like, okay, so, right, you get like a researcher pass to go and sit in the archives, and so you do an intake. They're quite not stringent. What's the word I'm looking for? They're
Very thorough.
thorough. Thank you. That's a good.
Very thorough.
Very thorough about how you handle the archives. They have things in there from like the 19th century, 17th and 18th and 19th centuries that you can't handle, like you have to have gloves on and whatnot. But with her papers, you didn't, which I kind of felt like I should have.
Mm.
And it was kind of unexpected, really, to sit there and have these moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, I'm reading something that she wrote when she was like in high school or when she was in college. And I came across a letter she wrote to Marvel Comics after Jack Kirby had left Marvel Comics. And I'm like, oh, okay, see, this assumption that that Black nerds have not existed prior to Urkel is itself a misnomer.
Yes.
And a misjudgment of Blackness, of Black folk. So yeah, it was, and it is always, each time it's been fascinating. Each time I've been able to find something that kind of touched me at a personal level.
Well,
Beautiful.
you said something I want to come back to, so I'll just put a pin in it. I'm coming back to the Black nerd part, but we have a great question from our audience that I think is a really good move to you talking about holding her papers and being there and it being a spiritual experience. I mean, I totally nerded out there too. I was like, oh, this is so cool. And really getting to see, you don't often get to see someone's process and their notes and the things they've been thinking, right? That produce the end products you like. And as we know, the end products do not start off like the end products, right? And so one of the great questions we have is, what aspects of Octavia Butler's writings do you see as providing an outline for a sense of political or Black liberation theology, but a kind of, liberating Black spirituality, I'll say. So that's a lot of times, that's what a lot of your book is about.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, that's where I would turn directly to the parable books. And what just hit me when I first read them were the Earthseed verses and Lauren Olamina's questions. She just dives right into theodicy. And theodicy, for our viewers, is simply how we attempt to justify God's goodness in the face of evil. And so Lauren is saying, okay, well, whose God is this? That her father's God is not her God. And I think that itself becomes or I would say for me, was reflective of my own kind of questioning my exodus, if you will, from Christianity, but not necessarily my exodus from religion. So for Butler, it is interesting to see how I think that the books reflect her own ambivalence about organized religion, not her rejection of religion, because she even notes that, look, religion is not something that is going to, quote unquote, go away. Religion is a constitutive part of people's experiences. And rather than take the tack that I've seen a lot of people, and myself at one point did, was like, oh, religion is just bad, and we'd all be better if we got rid of it. To think about how it can be shaped towards productive ends, and how religion shapes us, right? I mean, that's one of the Earthseed verses. Everything you touch changes you, and everything you touch, you change. So what she does is takes everything from Christianity, from Buddhism, from Judaism, Islam, and molds this thing called Earthseed. Now, while she herself said, okay, I don't think this could be a viable religion, it's certainly interesting to see, I think, Butler, through the character of Lauren Olamina, wrestle with religion, to wrestle with faith, to have a certain belief that things work out the way they're supposed to. And that doesn't always mean that's a good thing. That doesn't always, we don't always have, happiness, sunshine, rainbows, and puppies. Sometimes those things work out badly, but we have to pay attention to how we ourselves are working in those moments. I hope that got at the question.
No, that's great. You're reminding me of a sermon. I used to attend First AME Church in Los Angeles, and there was a guest pastor who was kind of breaking apart that phrase, "It's always darkest before the dawn," saying that's not so. there's a lot more darkness before dawn, and kind of sort of in that moment of grief, in that moment of struggle, not to sort of just deny that it exists, right? And when we talk about Octavia, I can't help but remember an interview that Steve and I did with her, where she talked about sort of Earthseed as sort of that element in the storytelling that she hoped could help us save ourselves, right? And Dawn, she thought it might be aliens. And Earthseed, what about if you take this spiritual system, but like Lauren Olamina, which is what I find most mind-blowing about it, is that she had fallen away from religion and Christianity herself. So I feel like I see so much of Octavia in Lauren, both having rejected, in the book's case, her father's religion, but as the author and as Lauren, creating this system that, while she might not have thought it would be a viable religion, certainly has been very sturdy for a lot of us in terms of how we approach hardship, how we approach being forced to change. I just find that fascinating to both reject it, but also to understand the power of an organizing principle to help bring people together and help people get through bad times. Oh, is he frozen?
Uh-oh, I think you're frozen.
We may need to text him and tell
Better
him
not moving.
to sign back in. Sometimes that happens. See, I talked too long. That's what happened, and he got
I
frozen.
was like, wait, why is he nodding?
I was like, oh, I must be way off course with this. But while we try to get Roger back in, that is one of the, and good.
Yeah,
that
I'll
is
come back in a moment.
Absolutely one of the things that I find so fascinating about it, because so often when organized religion disappoints us, the impulse is to just throw it all away. The whole idea of even needing philosophies to help us through these times. So I don't know how much you heard before you were frozen.
Yeah, I was. Something happened. I was like, okay, what happened? I was like,
you're not moving.
You're back. But I was just saying that I thought it was ironic and very interesting that Octavia had rejected traditional religion and Christianity, but yet created Earthseed, which, while it might not be a viable religion as she, saw it or thought it couldn't be, it's very sturdy and helping to a lot of us. Look at us here, our whole our whole thing here.
Number 20.
I mean, it was. I mean, reading the verses, and then also in the archives, there's a file in which she's just collected all of them, the ones that appear in the books and the ones that didn't appear in the books. And so
the lost verses of Earthseed.
Right. And I'm thinking, because one of the things I did was I just, would take photos of all of the things. So, thank God for modern technology. I mean, granted, okay, well, that is not completely perfect, but at least I was able to, capture all of these verses. And I think it's interesting that, when she says, okay, this isn't necessarily a viable religion, I'm like, well, why not? Why isn't it? Why wouldn't it be? I certainly know that for myself, I have found ways in which some of the verses have just become part of the ways in which I see the world. But that's also because of other experiences that have kind of combined with that. Or I would say experiences that have led to that. And I think maybe she meant, okay, maybe not necessarily a viable system in that there is a founder and that there's a kind of orthodoxy, but certainly they can function as, I think, mantras, ways in which we help center ourselves in times of stress and distress, times of conflict. Now, I can't say that I've done that when there's been conflict. Because of the limbic brain, the lizard brain, but I keep asking the question, well, why not? We certainly have made more religions out of less.
Well, that's for sure. I was going to get into another science fiction writer who created a religion, but we're not going to get into that. I think.
Oh, Lord!
Before you go on, Monica, I just wanted to add that I think part of what she did not want was to be seen as the center of a religion. By any means, that would not have been her personality at all.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah. She would not have. Yeah.
When you said mantras, it made me think, right? I mean, I kind of threw it in the chat because it jumped out to me when you said it. Not that we don't know this, but the way you said it was, her father's religion was not her religion, right? Which I think many people feel at some level. Like, the faith I inherited is not my faith. Now what? Right. And so Earthseed was her now what? Most of it, as you had said, there could be like, well, it's all got to go. But she didn't say it's all got to go. We just need something else. And you talked about Earthseed verses being a mantra. Would you say one could pray Earthseed verses?
I would say probably chant more or recite rhythmically more so than pray. Because I guess maybe it's because of how you could sing them.
Or do you mean more like meditation? Sing or meditation?
Well, I would say more like meditation. Well, at least I tend to think of them as, or when I'm taking a walk around campus, because on the backside of Furman's campus, there's a lovely lake, and that actually backs up to the Swamp Rabbit Trail. So when I'm doing that walk, if Butler comes into mind, of course, the primary verse about God is change, sometimes pops in my head. And sometimes I think about the one about intelligence being adaptive. That's another one.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Of course, there's also the one about, how you choose your leaders.
So many, so appropriate. There's a lot of interest in chat about the lost verses, and you may not remember, but I'm wondering if you can't remember a specific one, can you remember characteristics of the ones that didn't make the cut that gave you some hint as to why?
It's still on your phone. Can you pull them up?
I'd have to see. Oh my gosh.
We didn't mean to get so specific on you, but you brought it up.
That's my fault, right? That is my fault.
You said you took a picture. You could just put that on up to the screen here.
Let me see. No, okay.
It's okay if you can't right off the top of your head.
If you find them, you can text me or something, and I can share them with the list. That's why I'm being on the email list.
I'm sure she was very strict with herself about what got in and what didn't get in. Right. So I would suspect that quite a few of them would have been very lovely had they appeared in either of the books.
Oh gosh, now I wish I had grabbed my phone oh gosh, now I'm like, okay, let me see if I can hunt and peck and.
Don't worry.
That's fine.
Just curious.
I mean, you've written this whole book that's not just about Octavia Butler, but about Afrofuturism in general and Black religion. And I know that, knowing you, and actually also having read the book, that, your entree, shall I say, into science fiction is like part comic book, part Trekkie, right? Like that's your jam. So looking at all of Afrofuturism together, like kind of Octavia Butler, some of the things you're looking at with music, across the board, we have a great question about its connection to ancestral spirituality. And I think I'd also throw in its connection to hope, since that's something that's we're really hurting for in this pandemic.
Okay. I should have a caveat, present a caveat that I am not as well versed in like African spiritualities and traditional religions. So
we can have a lively conversation.
But when I speak about things like ancestor veneration, it's more from a place of realizing that the people in my life who've passed on aren't dead. They're physically gone, but I know I hear my grandmother sometimes, and I definitely hear my grandfather, especially when I get angry. And I sometimes hear my Oklahoma sometimes. I hear the Oklahoma show up, and I'm like, okay, that was very Tulsa. Where did that come?
And you're saying even the land is an ancestor, you're saying? The land or the culture?
My people.
Your people, okay.
My people. And so when I say, I left my mother's religion, I left Christianity, I'm like, there are times when I am thrown back into Sunday morning, and in the Church of Christ, there's a cappella singing, and they don't have instrumental music. So when I hear or sometimes remember what we sang and the way we sang it, it's present. So, and I have a thing for me, because where I live up in Travelers Rest, which is just a few miles north of Greenville, I can still see stars. And so at night, usually on a Friday night, if it's clear, I talk with them. So, and I would say I've had moments, I would say moments of clarity, if for lack of a better phrase, that I would say there was one moment, I would say back in 2013, where just for the briefest of moments, everything made sense. And that was in Brussels at the Museum of Musical Instruments. And, in this museum, you get to walk around and listen to different instruments from around the world, from different cultures. And by the time I got to the Armenian duduk, I had just, you have these moments where you just become lost in something. And the moment of clarity was that, we as human beings have, from different cultures, different moments in history, have all created music.
Yeah.
And if we as a species have this capacity to create beauty, this kind of beauty, there is a chance, there is hope. So, okay, my connection.
I lost your
my
video
internet connection
too,
is,
but
yes,
but
my internet connection is fine, but it's very weird.
no, I absolutely understand what you're saying in terms of music while you fiddle around and while Monica comes back, because she's also having issues. I don't know, the tech gods are not with us today, but music, I can totally understand what you mean by that. When I listen to the music from history, the music of the church, especially the Black church in the United States, there's just so much hope and beauty in that music that you think, well, this speaks so highly of us as humans, right?
Yes, absolutely. There are, I just, and I'm glad that you mentioned the Black church, because that is specifically what I'm talking about. In that we will take a hymn that when I've heard it in other contexts is just dry as dust, and imbue it with all kinds of life. And that to me is, here we go. That sign of our, I don't know if I want to use the word genius. I think sometimes we use that word genius, we toss that word around, but I think it's something better than that.
Well, when you consider that it was in the face of such horror and despair and poverty and, what could have been hopelessness, that music stirs people to their highest selves.
Oh, yeah. And to hear music, I mean, I wish I could sing. I wish I could produce music. I can't. So that is not, but to be able to hear music and to experience its beauty, and also I think to experience it in people's writing, coming back to the parable books, there's a certain kind of lyricism, and I have my iPad up. Because I'm scrolling through because I took like hundreds of pictures. I was like just
looking for those lost verses.
I'm looking for the lost verses.
You can't give up on it.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. I get stuck with something, and I'm like, I will find them. Or maybe I've gone back to. Oh no, okay. So, but that's the lyricism of people's writing itself is a way of entering into this kind of the ways in which we transcend ourselves. Yeah, I hope that got at your question.
That's certainly what Toshi Reagan saw when she did the Parable of Sower opera, because she said what was missing from the text was the folk singer, but in some ways the folk singer was already embedded in the text in terms of what you're talking about with the lyricism of the story and the verses, and it just feels so natural to hear it expressed through music. So very and importantly, for people who have fallen away from the traditional church, very often it's the music is like that last vestige of what they can hang on to and feel God stirring them, because what the pastor said made them mad, or the pastor was a hypocrite, or or the passages themselves, aren't speaking, but that music is so hard for some people to shake.
I mean, oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because there have been times when the sermon has no anointing, right?
Yes.
Ain't nobody's Jesus up in there.
No.
But then the choir comes along.
Exactly.
Right? And makes up for this absolute, dry toast of a sermon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yes. Well, Monica is frozen. I don't know why we're both so beset with issues today. But let me look at the questions so that I can see if there's something that you might want to talk about. There are a lot of good questions. Are you someone was mentioning that they were raised in the Black church and think of themselves as culturally Christian, you know, the way sometimes people identify as culturally Jewish when they don't actually practice as a religion. Are you seeing more Black folks shifting to non-Christian religious traditions while refusing to give up, you know, what, like we're saying, the music and other aspects of that church that feel so synonymous with not just spirituality, but Black culture itself?
I see it more with people, I would say my generation. I'm Gen X.
Me too. Okay, Gen X.
Yeah, I'm 1970. So I see more Black people, specifically Black women, who are saying that this traditional religion is not doing it for me. I am going to either do a combination of traditional Christianity along with kind of reaching back and looking through African spiritualities as a way of kind of combining those to craft a new way of being Black in this world.
There may be someone on this webinar who's had that experience.
I think. Well, yeah, right. I was like, I'm going back to Monica's bio.
Although I would frame it differently. I probably wouldn't. I don't know if I was an Earthseeder first. I mean, I very much, read Earthseed as like, yes, this sounds more accurate than other traditions, or than other theologies, right? So I think it's not always the entire religion that people have a problem with, but a particular approach to that religion. And most people, right, only have the experience that they have, right? So like the experience of whatever you grew up with or whatever you've seen is all there is. And until you're like, oh, wait, there are lots of ways to be Christian, lots of ways to be Muslim, there are lots of ways to be Buddhist. Right. But no one told me that. They told me that this way was the only way. So maybe it's another way of being in the same tradition, or it could be, I want to be in a different tradition altogether. Right. I think for me with African-American religiosity, it's not singular anyway. Right. I mean, that's why Black Christianity doesn't look like white Christianity. Right. Because Black Christianity always has other elements in it. It's always got Black culture, which has some ancestral religion in it, which has some Islam in it, right? So it's not like it's the same Christianity. I mean, scholars have been writing about that for years, right? But because there's been one way of, a couple ways of doing it, there could be more, right? There could be other ones. And go ahead. I was going to talk about how Afrofuturism gives us some notes, right, about what Black religion can be. I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about that.
About what Black religion could be.
And go on, because I was going to set the context for you in terms of Parable of the Sower being Afrofuturism, in the sense that not only is it a Black woman creator, and that it's literally set in the future, but it lays out a path toward healing and creating a better future, specifically. So then with that context, I'll be quiet.
Oh, gosh. Yes. So this, I think in some ways, maybe where we are in this moment is we're seeing, I think, these shifts, but we also see kind of traditional religions and its adherents trying to hold on and maybe recover something that they thought was kind of foundational. And some people try to retrieve traditional Black Christianity and say, hey, it's not completely misogynistic. It's not completely homophobic. It's not completely anti-woman. It's not completely anti-child. We're trying to reform it into something that is more cognizant of the ways in which our lives have shifted and changed. And so there's that tension, right? That reforming Black religious life runs up against, the people and the institutions that have had the kind of power for so long. I mean, when we hear people talking about the Black church as the bedrock of the Black community, and for so long, to even go into something like politics, you had to kind of pass through the gates of, such and so's missionary Baptist church, to gain the pastor's endorsement. And I think, of course, I'm thinking of something like Black Lives Matter, where its creators, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, said, okay, well, we want a movement that isn't tied to one specific form of Black religiosity or Black religiosity at all. I think that to reshape Black religion also requires an imagination. We have to imagine Blackness beyond kind of like this reading of the Bible or the church, not necessarily toss it out, but rather to say, okay, well, how can we think of this differently in something like in the year 2021?
Yes. Yeah. One of the things, I think Monica might have been the one to tell me, and she'll be back in. She's having technical issues on, I think power's out in her whole house. So it's a pretty severe technical issue. But I think she was the one who told me that half of students drop out of seminary, right? Their first year. I don't know if that's a true statistic, but let's just say there's a large percentage of people who think they want to study theology and maybe even go into the ministry. But then when they're confronted with scripture, like deep reading, and then see contradictions, and then, learn the history of the formation of scriptures and the politics and what was left in and what was left out, their faith gets shaken. Yeah. And one of the really interesting aspects of Parable of the Sower is how often Lauren entertains questions from people who doubt her, from people who don't understand Earthseed. And she's very often just sort of patiently answering questions. And this is something there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of room for in a lot of organized religion. I remember being so relieved to read that in a history book that Dr. King had expressed doubts about the resurrection at a certain point. I was like, oh, wait, he's allowed to have doubts?
Oh, gosh, I'm so, it's, growing up in the church, I wasn't supposed to ask questions, and that's all I ever did was ask questions and argue with people. So, and if the statistic of people dropping out of seminary is true or even close to being true, I mean, I've seen it. I saw it when I was at Candler, how people would get so shaken up by something that, for example, our Hebrew Bible professor would say about, the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star, not having anything to do with Jesus. And I remember a person sitting next to me saying, well, I can't preach that. And I'm like, so you're not going to take this back to your congregation so they can be edified. It's some people will go to seminary or theology school or schools of divinity for the credentialing. Because, the MDiv, the DMin, the PhD, the THD gives that person a certain level of more authority than the Reverend does. Some are, I would say, seekers are there. I would say, like myself, I was like, look, y'all have told me that being gay is a sin. I'm going to go study religion and figure this out for myself. And some of us are just, I would say, just there.
That is huge, by the way. I don't want to gloss over that point. I don't know what percentage of people have specifically been put off by traditional churches, Black churches, because of the church's relationship to homosexuality and considering it a sin and preaching that it's a sin. But I suspect it's a high number between the actual queer members and their families and their allies. It's just one of those things where it's a bridge too far for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. My own mother, we, to this day, she talks about my quote unquote lifestyle. And I'm like, what? Me being a nerd? And she will never see being gay as anything other than a sin.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I'm sorry about
and
that. By the way, it must be very difficult.
it is difficult. But at this point, there's nothing, I can't, make her think differently. And I think for those of us who've left the church, the organized Christian church, I think that is that kind of inability to move that is of dismay, especially the contributions that we as Black queer people have contributed to the church.
Say that, yeah, right.
I'm not, I'm like, look, all of us in this chat, if we listen to gospel music, thank a queer because we did that. Well, may not me, but we did that. We have been the ones, and that takes me back to Essex Hemphill and Marlon Riggs and Audre Lorde, who said, we have been here. And I hate that we're in another moment, especially when we're talking about trans people, of saying, we have been here. And for us as Black gays and lesbians and bisexual people, we also have to remember that it was because of Black and Hispanic trans people that we even have a modern or contemporary queer rights movement. And so when I see us doing things like siding with that comedian who shall not be named.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. And saying, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm like, you know what? Keep that same energy when a white male comedian starts talking about Black folks. Keep that same energy. Okay, so I'm talking with my hands.
It wasn't among the questions, but it is something that is a topic of conversation, and there's so many things wrong with both what he said in the special and several specials, really. But also very disappointed to find so many people, because of their they love this particular comic and respect this, and they have a history with this comic, will not let themselves even examine it. And because he's touching on racism, that's supposed to make it okay. Well, no, it's not.
No,
it's not okay.
It's not. And the thing is, I keep saying, look, not at the risk of just sounding kind of hokey and invoking Martin Luther King Jr. here, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Right.
And if I am a cisgender Black gay man, if I refuse to see the humanity in my trans brothers and sisters, and if I refuse to see the imago Dei in them, then this book that I wrote is just basically, send it back to Amazon because it's,
right.
It's not worth the paper it's print. And that's also, and when we start coming back to Octavia Butler, that is also itself change. I mean, we're not always kind of in those spaces. And if we do the work, because I know I've got like a ton of blind spots, and I have to have conversations with myself and say, self, did you just think that? Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, the lack of interrogation that people are exposing themselves to is really something to behold.
Because it's not comfortable. And I think that's, again, also where the parables lead us. That level of introspection is not comfortable. And I'm telling you, when I was in grad school, I was in therapy for a good, I think about 3 of the 4 years that I was in residence in Nashville. And that look into the self, it wasn't cute. It's not like I put on some Gucci and whatever. It's like, oh yeah, look at me. No, it's like, oh, that's why I do these things. That's why and these are why there are these patterns that I exhibit. These are the patterns that, and I'm like, oh, and even now, especially at 50, because I've had a lot of like life changes over the last, I'd say 5 years. And it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting this. So when you talk about change, it's like, whoa, I wasn't prepared for this. I was just kind of thought. I mean,
I love.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You mentioned that word change, and it got me all animated. But that I think that's what is so powerful, obviously, about the Earthseed verses and their emphasis on change and grappling with and embracing change as a face of God and stop fighting it. One of the questions we had, which is actually pandemic oriented, is what you have witnessed in terms of whether it's your own relationship to faith or the relationship of people around you. Have people fallen more deeply into faith, falling away, sort of away from it, or re-examining it? Like this is an opportunity to also let go of some old ideas and bring in some new ideas. How has the stress of the pandemic affected you and others you're seeing?
Well, I would say for me, the stress of the pandemic hasn't really affected. Well, I take that back now. I think I would say I've had to kind of balance anxiety, fear, and okay, what's life going to be like on the other side of this? Or is there going to ever be an other side of this? I think I've seen, I don't think I've seen a shift in kind of like religiosity in general, but then again, I'm not in like a large city or anything. I'm in a fairly small city in the upstate of South Carolina. But I think in some ways, if I'm going to go positive, I guess negative, is that what I've seen is people using an appeal to faith as a way of avoiding getting the vaccine.
Yes.
And this, religious objections. I'm like, what religious objections are there, especially if you've had other vaccines when you had to go to public school? Now all of a sudden, this is the problem. What faith is it that is somehow preventing you from getting the vaccine? And that is where people wind up becoming extraordinarily non-specific. I think that what I saw at the beginning of the pandemic was people struggling with how to do something like worship. How do you do this if we can't be in the physical space? And that to me was a little, I thought to myself, well, isn't God with you? Now there's the communal aspect. Now let me just say, now there is also the communal aspect that people, were missing that community, that communal aspect. But then I'd also say, well, hey, there are other ways possibly of doing this that might not, harm or possibly put other people at risk. Exactly. And I think I saw some communities like my mother's church that did well with that, with, making sure that people were safe. And then I saw here in Greenville, I saw some churches like, no, we're going to meet inside, in person anyway. And I'm like, wow, okay. Yeah. So, I think what will happen, or actually, I want to come back to something. What I think that we as a nation have not done is we haven't collectively grieved. I mean, we're now into 700. Well, I can't remember the number as the last time, but well over 700,000 people who've died.
Exactly.
We haven't grieved. We haven't processed this. We haven't processed the stress that our healthcare workers are enduring.
No.
We have not engaged in the kind of community of care that Butler was trying to model in the Earthseed community, right?
Very well put.
Yeah.
For so many reasons. Some of them having to do with the fact that as a society, we've always expected people to grieve in privacy and have loss in privacy and shut away aging and death and illness so that we don't have to see it. But when you add the denial, the politicization of the pandemic, other factors I'm not thinking of, you are absolutely right. As a nation, we have not grieved. So how do you move on when you haven't even acknowledged the grief that you've been sitting with?
Right. That winds up sitting, and then it becomes anger. It becomes a horrible thing if you don't process that grief. If you don't work yeah, and if you don't sit with it and understand that it will always be with you, it might, is it when people say move on, you don't move on, you move forward.
Well put.
Um, yeah. In 2015, my youngest sister died,
Sorry.
and there are days when, and actually was it last year my aunt died, and then back in 2004 my grandmother. There are times, just I don't know why, sometimes I'm like, oh, I should call grandmother. I'm like,
That never quite
I
goes away
can't.
in my experience.
Yeah, it never goes away.
No, it's just
But it
it becomes
becomes
a part of
part.
you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you learn. I think I think one day I woke up and I was like, I can see the world in color again. I was like, oh, I didn't realize how depressed I'd been. But it's there, and it will always be there. It will, but how do I then shape that, or what do I do with it? What do I do with that? Um, you see people who are grieving, and then that grief just becomes just this rage that is just directed outward, and there's no piercing that becomes their shield. And I think we in this country, we're used to taking grief and turning it into rage. I think we're a nation that is far more accustomed to anger
Yes.
as a default emotion, than we are. We're good at superficial displays of care and consolation, but when you have to go past a year of caring for someone who is grieving, then it's like, well, why are you still
Why are you still sad? Yeah.
why are you still sad?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
why are you still talking about it? Right.
right?
Well, I wanted to make sure we had a chance to share about your book because you're also there. Let's see if it works from my phone.
Yes,
awesome.
great.
Hey.
Yes, can you share?
Great.
I can't read it because I'm working off my phone. The power went out in my whole neighborhood.
Oh my goodness! So,
And the
gosh, that's
and
awesome.
the dreamer and the dream, Afrofuturism and Black religious thought. Roger Snead illuminates the interplay of Black religious thought with science fiction narratives to present a bold case for Afrofuturism as an important channel for Black spirituality. So that sounds amazing.
So yeah, I made a short little link for it at bit.ly. Octavia tried Sneed. That'll get you to where you can get the book.
Yeah. Oh, great. Do you want me to say something about the book, or?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, Monica, you broke up because before we were doing kind of like the sound and video check, I was saying this is my baby. This is my second book, and no shade to my first book, but this is the book I've always wanted to write, but I don't think I knew how to write it. I think that if I had gone and been stubborn and written something on science fiction and religion, it would be dry and it would be just completely descriptive. This was actually the seed, if you will, the from which the book grew was my chapter on Benjamin Sisko and the episode Far Beyond the Stars. Yeah,
my husband Stephen Barnes wrote the novelization of that,
and I have that, and I have that, and I think I mentioned that in
okay.
In the I have I have read it. After Trayvon Martin's murderer was acquitted, and then after like this litany of names, one to kind of for me to deal with the grief and that was transmuting into rage. was to watch Star Trek. And
Mm.
I then turned to that episode, and then it became an almost weekly ritual. And I started, I said to myself, why this episode? And of course, it is because of this vision that Benny Russell gets, this prophet who tells him to write the words. And, and that episode was cathartic for me because, when the prophet says to him, you are the dreamer in the dream, that episode, every time it would end, I would just be like in sobbing because that would be the emotional release I needed after
Yes.
seeing yet another Black person's execution on social media. And so I said, okay, I'm going to write about this. And so I started writing an essay. I shopped it around to a couple of journals, and that process was interesting. We'll just leave that there. And I had then applied to some institute, I think out in California, that was doing something on public theology. So I'd written up a proposal, and I got rejected. And so I said, well, I've got this 16-page document. And I'm like, well, why don't you turn this into a book? And then my friend Kenitra Brooks, because she had read drafts of this. Oh yeah, she had read drafts of this, and I'm like, I have to give her a shout out because her commentary. I was teaching a first year writing seminar at the time, and I showed students the draft that had her comments, and they were like, "How do you feel?" And I'm like, "She was right, but
Grateful." Yeah.
She's right about everything, but I need a drink and I need a hug. But no, but her comments were incisive. And so then I said, hey, do you think this would be a good fit for the New Sons series that she and Susanna Morris are co-editors? And she was like, yes. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I just started writing, and I had some things that were in, files that I hadn't picked up in years. And it grew. And at one point when I first started this, I think it was just the chapter on Octavia Butler was going to be a chapter on Octavia and Janelle Monáe. And I thought that's going to do a disservice to both of them. So you need to not do that. You need to do a chapter on her and then a chapter on Janelle. And the writing process, I would say for this book was, there were moments when I was like, I'm stuck and I don't know where to go, but it was, I don't know if fun is not the word. This was a labor of love. Yeah, this is
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, it looks fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm kind of chuckling at me setting the table with Afrofuturism when you wrote the book on the Afrofuturism and Black religious thought. So good for you.
And it's great because you look at, I tend to be a literary person, but you really look at various expressions of Afrofuturism. And so, even if you're not, in that world, you'll still get the book and love it, So that's my plug too.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. And as you mentioned earlier, that as Monica mentioned earlier about me, that I came to science fiction through comic books and Star Trek. And so for me, this is also my theoretical justification of myself as a Black gay nerd. So,
perfect.
I said that, well, by gum, I'm going to write this thing. And
Yeah. And you make in that book, I think it's a good segue, a strong argument about, the community of blurs out there, right? That it's not like, oh, there's just a couple of Black people who like science fiction, but like, no, this is a whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
And we have found that community has been super important for us in this pandemic. Can you share a bit more about it, Tananarive?
Absolutely. Once we started doing these webinars, we realized that people wanted to continue the conversation or, in fact, be more a part of the conversation. So we started a community called Shaping Change, where we discuss Octavia's 7 steps of shaping change as we've interpreted through her work, an ongoing discussion of her work and influence, a Shaping Change e-journal for daily meditations and monthly writing prompts. More interaction with us. You can be on the screen too, a social media community. And when you sign up, we send you the interview with Octavia Butler that I was referring to earlier that my husband Steve and I conducted with her. And in fact, we're meeting next week. We always meet the week after this webinar. So if you would like to join us, please do at www.octaviawebinar.com.
Wow.
We hope to see you there. I see some of the members here. So it's good. Like Ted is here. So it's good to see you. We hope to see you then. And thank you so much for our guest today. Despite all the technical issues, you were incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. You know, again, it is an honor. And again, thank you so much.
And thanks for even mentioning that there are other verses.
Glad to have you here.
If you couldn't find them, we still love you.
They're on. I think because I was on my iPad, and I think
now we'll be on the quest.
I'm gonna
we're gonna quest now for the lost verses.
I'm gonna go grab my phone because I think that's where they are.
But thank you to everyone who is here. Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Oh, Lisa's here. So it's good to see people, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye bye.
See you next time.
All right. Bye bye.